Have you ever noticed the same number appearing again and again? The same animal crossing your path? A dream that repeats. You brush it off. Coincidence, you say, but deep down it unsettles you. Why does reality feel like it's trying to speak? This video will uncover the psychological truth behind those signs and explain why they won't stop until you finally listen. What we refer to as signs in life, those strange repetitions, peculiar patterns, and uncanny encounters, are not simply coincidences or glitches in reality. They are, more accurately, symbolic expressions of the unconscious attempting to communicate with the conscious mind. Modern life, in its relentless pursuit of logic and order, has marginalized the symbolic. Yet the psyche has not lost its ancient tongue. It still speaks in the language of symbols. Timeless, intuitive, often misunderstood. The unconscious is not a passive reservoir of repressed memories. It is a living system, a dynamic force that continuously shapes perception, emotion, and even the trajectory of one's life. Unlike the conscious mind, which deals in reason and clarity, the unconscious operates through association, myth, metaphor, and image. It reveals itself through dreams, impulses, fantasies, and, when those fail to be integrated, through externalized symbols that seem to appear in waking life. To understand the significance of symbols, one must first understand the nature of the unconscious itself. It is not merely a repository of forgotten facts or trauma. It is the totality of all that is not presently within awareness. This includes not only repressed memories, but also instinctual drives, undeveloped potentials, and archetypal patterns that are inherited rather than acquired. These deeper layers do not simply sit dormant. They strive for realization, for integration into the conscious personality. And when that integration is resisted or ignored, the unconscious must find alternative routes to be heard. Symbols are one of those routes. They are not inventions of the mind, but autonomous manifestations of meaning. They arise when the unconscious seeks to bring something forth that cannot yet be grasped by rational thought. Because of this, symbols are not fixed in their meaning. A bird, a road, a repeated number sequence. Each may hold vastly different significance, depending on the psychic state of the individual encountering them. What is universal is not the object itself, but the function it serves to bridge the known and the unknown within the psyche. Consider the experience of repeatedly seeing the same image, a fox, for example, whether in dreams, advertisements, conversations, or on a walk. At first glance, it may be dismissed as trivial, but over time, the frequency and emotional weight attached to this repetition compels attention. Why a fox? Why now? It is not the outer world that is signaling. It is the inner world projecting outward in symbolic form. The fox may represent cunning, adaptability, or elusiveness, qualities that the individual has disowned or is in the process of developing. The unconscious does not explain this directly. Instead, it offers the symbol and waits for the conscious mind to decode its personal resonance. When the conscious mind remains unreceptive, the symbols intensify. The unconscious will not be silenced easily. If ignored, the signs may evolve into psychological disturbances, anxiety, neurosis, depression, each a louder knock-on the door of awareness. But even in their gentler forms, signs persist because something within seeks articulation. The psyche desires wholeness, and any element that is repressed or unacknowledged becomes a splinter in that wholeness, demanding recognition. The sign, then, is not an external anomaly. It is an internal demand for psychological balance. The modern person, distanced from ritual, myth, and inner stillness, often finds themselves alienated from this symbolic layer of life. The ancient world did not suffer from such alienation. In every culture, symbols were sacred: the serpent, the tree, the sun, the moon. These were not decorative motifs. They were embodiments of deep psychological truths. Today, the same symbolic forces operate beneath the surface, but without a conscious framework to receive them, they emerge in unexpected and confusing ways. When you find yourself haunted by a pattern, repeatedly drawn to a particular number or image, the first mistake is to externalize it entirely. The sign does not come from out there. It is born within, then projected outward where it can be seen. The psyche does not always reveal itself through introspection alone. It often chooses the outer world as a canvas upon which to display its inner content. Dreams are perhaps the most recognized theater of the unconscious. But waking life, too, can become a dream, like space when symbols erupt into it with force. When a person is on the verge of transformation, emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically, the unconscious often amplifies its efforts. At such times, symbols and signs become more vivid, more frequent, and more impossible to ignore. These are not superstitions. They are indicators that the inner world is in motion, that the soul is gesturing toward a threshold, asking the conscious self to cross it. Understanding symbols, therefore, is not about decoding some universal message. It is about deep listening. The sign you keep seeing is not arbitrary. It is a mirror. It reflects a forgotten piece of the self. Whether that piece is a wound, a gift, or a shadow depends on the context of your personal journey. The symbol arrives when language fails. It is not concerned with logic. It is concerned with truth. The kind of truth that cannot be spoken, only felt and integrated. There comes a moment in every human life when reality begins to echo the inner state of the soul. A thought arises, almost as if in response, the outer world presents an image, an event, or a pattern that perfectly reflects the thought. You think of someone, and they call. You ponder a question, and a stranger utters the answer. You wonder about a change in your life, and symbols begin to appear, numbers repeating, animals crossing your path, fragments of songs that mirror your inner conflict. The mind, trained in rationalism, rushes to label it as coincidence. The psyche senses something deeper, a resonance between the outer world and the inner one. This phenomenon is not ruled by causality, it is governed by meaning. And meaning, unlike cause, emerges from the invisible architecture of the soul. Synchronicity is the experience of two or more events that are not linked causally yet are bound together by a profound sense of significance. To the ordinary mind, such events appear disconnected, accidental. But to the deep psyche, they are threads in a larger, invisible tapestry. The assumption that everything must be reduced to physical causation is itself a form of blindness. What synchronicity unveils is a truth that transcends linear explanation. It suggests that the psyche is not sealed within the skull, but is instead intimately entangled with the world around it. The line between inner and outer begins to blur. When you encounter synchronicity, you are witnessing a rupture in the facade of separation, a glimpse into the hidden unity of existence. This alignment between inner and outer is not something that can be summoned at will. It often emerges during times of emotional intensity, inner conflict, or spiritual crisis. Periods when the conscious mind is struggling to maintain its usual control, and the unconscious begins to surface with greater intensity. In such times, the self is particularly sensitive, open to the symbolic language of the world. The psyche projects its unresolved tensions outward, and the world, in turn, responds like a mirror. But it is not merely projection, it is correspondence. The outer event is not created by the inner state in a mechanical sense. Rather, both are expressions of a deeper shared order. There is an ancient intelligence in the structure of the psyche, one that understands what the ego cannot. When a symbolic event occurs, when the world seems to answer a silent question, it is not chance at work, but necessity. Not the necessity of cause and effect, the necessity of meaning. The psyche is striving to make you whole, and in doing so, it reaches out through whatever channel is available. Sometimes this channel is a dream. Other times it is a conversation overheard, a book opened to a random page, or a moment that seems too precise to be accidental. In traditional societies, such moments were seen as oracles, divine interventions, or messages from the gods. In the modern world, we have lost this symbolic sensitivity. But the experiences persist. People still encounter the uncanny, the meaningful coincidence that defies rational expectation. They simply lack the framework to interpret it. Synchronicity is not bound to belief. It does not require that one be spiritual, religious, or even psychologically aware. It occurs because it is embedded in the structure of consciousness itself. Meaning is not a human invention. It is a feature of reality as experienced by the psyche. And when that meaning becomes activated, the world begins to shimmer with signs. There is a certain humility required to understand synchronicity. The ego, which seeks control and predictability, is threatened by it. To accept that the world can reflect our inner life is to accept that we are not isolated beings, but participants in a larger, mysterious whole. This realization can be unsettling, but it is also liberating. It suggests that life is not a series of disconnected events, a dialogue between soul and cosmos. The recurring symbols you see, the clock striking the same number, the animal reappearing, the word repeating across unrelated conversations, these are not trivial patterns. They are ruptures in the illusion of separation. They reveal that your life is not merely happening to you, it is speaking to you. Yet it is not enough to notice these patterns. One must ask why they appear. What is the psychological context in which this synchronicity unfolds? What tension in the soul is being mirrored in the external world? To see the pattern is the first step. To interpret it, to live it, is the work of inner transformation. The synchronicity may confirm a hidden truth, offer a path forward, or signal that a decision must be made. But its message cannot be deciphered with intellect alone. It requires a symbolic attitude, an openness to the language of metaphor and dream. Synchronicity often marks a threshold, a moment when one is invited to cross from the known into the unknown, from fragmentation into deeper alignment. It is not a superstition but a psychic reality, and it does not obey our logic because it emerges from a deeper kind of logic, one that binds inner meaning to outer form, one that operates in patterns, symbols, and resonance. To encounter synchronicity is to be reminded that the unconscious is not separate from the world, but is in constant conversation with it. What you call reality is shaped, in part, by the unseen movements of the psyche, which seeks recognition not only through dreams and emotions, but through the world itself. One of the most elusive truths of psychological life is that we rarely perceive the world as it is. Rather, we see it through the lens of our inner landscape, shaped by memories, wounds, instincts, and unconscious patterns. The psyche, in its complexity, does not remain confined within the boundaries of personal thought. It extends itself outward, casting its contents onto the world in the form of projection. This mechanism is not a flaw of human perception. It is fundamental to how we organize and make sense of reality. Yet, when unrecognized, projection becomes a veil that distorts experience, making it seem as though the outer world is acting upon us, when, in truth, it is reflecting us. Projection occurs when the unconscious mind attributes its own qualities, often those it cannot or will not accept, to external objects, people, or circumstances. These qualities can be dark, such as envy, anger, or shame, but they can also be idealized love, wisdom, power. In both cases, projection allows the psyche to encounter parts of itself in a form it can tolerate. It is easier, for instance, to see danger in another person than to confront one's own aggression. It is more comfortable to admire someone's strength from afar than to recognize the dormant potential within oneself. The signs that appear in the external world may therefore be less about divine intervention and more about psychic reflection. They are not meaningless repetitions, but symbolic footprints left by the unconscious mind as it seeks reintegration. Pattern recognition is closely tied to this process. The mind is inherently structured to identify patterns, to extract order from chaos. This ability is evolutionary, a survival mechanism. But in the psychological realm, this faculty becomes something more mysterious. We do not only see patterns in things, we begin to assign meaning to them. A crow on the windowsill, a number appearing on every clock, a word that follows us through books and screens. These repetitions stir something deeper than curiosity. They awaken a subtle anxiety or a strange sense of significance. What we call seeing signs is often a form of intuitive pattern recognition, fueled by unconscious material surfacing into awareness. This becomes even more profound when the patterns we see are emotionally charged. Emotional energy acts like a spotlight. It intensifies perception, amplifies coincidence, and sharpens symbolic associations. If an individual is experiencing inner conflict, longing, or repression, the psyche will seek resolution through symbolic forms. The outer world becomes a kind of psychological canvas onto which the inner world is projected. Patterns that appear, whether through people, objects, or repeated images, are rarely random. They resonate with the internal tensions and complexes of the individual. It is not merely that we recognize the pattern, it is that we need to. The symbol, in this context, acts as a container for unconscious content. When a symbol or pattern repeats, it draws attention to what the conscious mind has failed to integrate. The repetition is not accidental. It is the insistence of the psyche to be known. What one sees again and again may be a representation of a shadow figure, an archetype, or a forgotten emotional truth. For example, someone who consistently encounters images or metaphors of abandonment may be confronting an unresolved wound from early attachment. Another who sees symbols of duality or mirrors may be facing a crisis of identity or the need to reconcile opposites within the self. The world becomes saturated with meaning not because it has changed, but because the inner world is demanding recognition. In this way, projection is not merely a defense mechanism, it is a guide. It reveals what the conscious ego cannot yet face directly. When one becomes aware that these patterns are reflections, not prophecies, it opens a path to deeper self-understanding. The symbolic repetition that once felt uncanny begins to feel purposeful. One is no longer haunted by signs, but drawn toward their message. The external world no longer seems arbitrary, but charged with personal relevance. But to navigate this terrain, one must move beyond literalism. The psyche does not speak in straightforward declarations. It speaks in images, associations, and emotional resonance. The meaning of a repeated sign cannot be found in a dictionary or decoded through a universal key. It must be understood in the context of the individual's psychic life. Why does a particular pattern trouble or fascinate you? What emotional state accompanies its appearance? What forgotten story in your personal history might be resurfacing? The answers lie not in the object, in the subject, the one who sees, feels, and assigns meaning. Projection is most powerful when it goes unnoticed. When you believe the outer world is the source of your discomfort, you externalize responsibility for your inner state. But when you begin to see the signs as mirrors rather than messages, the veil begins to lift. You realize that much of what you fear, admire, avoid, or desire in others is a reflection of something within. This awareness is not merely intellectual. It is transformational. It requires the courage to withdraw the projections and reclaim them, to see the symbolic patterns not as accidents or omens, but as doorways to the self. The moment you begin to wonder why a pattern keeps appearing is the moment consciousness begins to widen. The pattern no longer lives only in the world. It begins to live in you. The psyche, ever striving for wholeness, uses these projections to initiate dialogue with the self. The repetition, the symbol, the emotional charge. They are the language of the unconscious, reaching into the realm of daily life, asking not to be understood with the mind alone, to be integrated into the fullness of being. There are moments in life that seem to resist ordinary explanation. Moments that unsettle, disrupt, or awaken a part of us that has long remained dormant. Often, these moments are preceded or accompanied by the repeated presence of certain symbols, numbers, encounters, or events that hold no logical connection to our actions, yet press upon our attention with undeniable force. These are not merely curious coincidences. They are the stirrings of something deeper, something that originates in the innermost depths of the psyche and reaches outward in search of recognition. These are signs of an inner shift, signals from within that an old way of being is dissolving and a new path is beginning to emerge. This path is not toward perfection or achievement, but toward wholeness. It is the path of individuation. Individuation is the slow and often painful process by which a person becomes who they truly are. Not who they are conditioned to be, not who they pretend to be, but the full expression of the unique essence latent within them. It is the unfolding of the self, layer by layer, through encounters with the unconscious, the shadow, and the symbolic life. When we speak of signs appearing over and over again in our lives, we are often describing the psyche's effort to initiate this unfolding. The signs are not external commands or magical omens. They are psychic messages made visible through the world around us. They mark the beginning of a conversation between the known and the unknown, between the ego and the deeper self. What compels this conversation to begin is often suffering. The ego, built upon years of adaptation and societal expectation, reaches a limit. Its strategies for control, validation, and meaning no longer satisfy the soul. Life feels hollow or disjointed. One senses a kind of spiritual hunger, though the outer life may still appear intact. It is during such inner draughts that the unconscious begins to press forward with symbols. These may come in dreams, but more often they begin to appear in the world, through repetition and resonance. A number appears again and again, drawing your attention. A mythological animal recurs across different contexts. A phrase, a book, a name keeps surfacing as though the world itself were conspiring to speak. But it is not the world that initiates this. It is the self, the center of the total psyche, which includes both conscious and unconscious. The self seeks wholeness, not comfort. It calls the individual to confront the parts of themselves they have rejected, denied, or simply not yet discovered. This call is not loud, it is subtle. And for those who are deeply identified with their conscious identity, the signs may seem meaningless or even intrusive. But for the one who is beginning to awaken, they mark the first flickers of transformation. The psyche is preparing to reorient itself. The signs are not arbitrary. They are invitations to descend into the deeper layers of the soul. This descent is necessary, for individuation cannot occur at the surface of life. It demands an encounter with the shadow, that part of ourselves we most fear or ignore. Often, the symbols that appear repeatedly are aspects of this shadow, presented in a way the conscious mind can finally begin to engage with. The same image may appear in art, conversation, and nature, not because it has objective power, but because it carries subjective weight. It represents something that needs to be integrated, some quality, truth, or wound that must be acknowledged. The self uses such images to guide the ego toward this necessary confrontation, not as punishment, but as preparation for growth. As this process deepens, the individual begins to feel a split between who they have been and who they are becoming. The signs grow louder, not in volume, but in intensity. They feel alive. This is because they are alive. They are symbols animated by psychic energy, trying to draw attention to the process unfolding within. The ego may resist, clinging to the familiar, but the self is persistent. It will continue to send symbols until the ego either responds or collapses. Sometimes the signs stop not because the work is done, but because the ego has become too rigid to hear. But for those who listen, the signs become like stars guiding a ship through dark waters. They do not point to the final destination, but they offer direction when none seems available. Individuation is not linear. It is a spiral path, requiring one to revisit old wounds with new awareness, to reclaim dissound parts of the soul, to make conscious what was unconscious. The signs are not the path itself. They are markers along the way. They illuminate what must be felt, confronted, understood, and ultimately integrated. Every repeated image, every meaningful coincidence, is a mirror reflecting a deeper truth. And though no two paths are the same, the structure of the journey is universal, a descent into the unknown followed by a slow, courageous return to a life lived from the center, rather than the margins. The one who walks this path does not seek to escape the world, to engage it more fully, no longer from a place of unconscious reaction, but from the ground of an inner wholeness that knows both light and shadow. The signs that once confused now become allies. The world no longer feels random, but resonant, and the self, which once spoke only through symbols and strange patterns, begins to emerge in daily life as an inner presence, silent yet unwavering, always drawing the individual back toward what they truly are. When you find yourself seeing signs, recurring numbers, symbols, phrases, or encounters, it is not the universe playing tricks, nor is it a mere accident of chance. It is the psyche speaking in the only language it knows: symbols, patterns, and resonance. These moments are invitations, not commands. They are not telling you what to do, but asking you to listen, to look inward, to ask what part of me is being mirrored here? What truth have I avoided that now demands my attention? Beneath what seems random lies a hidden order, a silent dialogue between your inner world and the outer reality. The signs are not separate from you. They emerge when the unconscious begins to stir, when the soul aches for something deeper, something whole. Whether they manifest as synchronicity, projection, or emotional resonance, they all point to the same truth: that your life is not disconnected chaos, but a meaningful journey unfolding in symbolic steps. To ignore the signs is to prolong the silence between who you are and who you could become. But to engage with them, not as superstitions, as psychological revelations, is to begin the sacred process of individuation. And in doing so, you do not find a destination. You discover a self that was always there, waiting to be remembered.